Welcome to Sobol Says for Parshas Terumah. As we know, this parsha has neither drama nor action in it, but rather it describes the Mishkan and all of its vessels that we are instructed to construct, as well as the requirement that people contribute towards it. And before we focus on the famous second pasuk of this parsha, because that is enough for us today probably, we won't go much beyond that. Let's first reflect on the following. We spoke last week about the famous first Rashi in Parshas Mishpatim, which asks why the portion of Mishpatim, which discusses civil laws, interpersonal laws, etc., is juxtaposed to the prior Parsha, Yisro, which revolved around our receiving the Torah at Har Sinai. And Rashi, quoting the Medrash, we discussed it a lot last week, informed us that it is to tell us that just as the Ten Commandments and the ritualistic laws were received at Sinai, so too these civil laws were given at Sinai as well. And we should not make the mistake of thinking that they are not as important. And as long as we are ritualistically serving Hashem, then we can skirt some of those rules. But it's interesting to note that although Rashi does not ask the question at the beginning of this week's Parsha, we're compelled to ask almost the identical question, which is why this Parsha, which discusses the building of Hashem's house, the Mishkan, with all its attendant and excruciating details, and where we can serve Hashem in the most ritualistic way possible, why is it juxtaposed to last week's Parsha, which was all about civil and interpersonal laws? The question is just as good on this end as it was on last week's, right? Last week, the whole question was, why are those two parshios attached? It actually says, ve'ela. It could be that's why Rashi is prompted over there, because there the Torah is clearly indicating that those laws are attached to each other, just as we received the Ten Commandments, so we received all of those interpersonal and civil laws at Sinai as well. However, after going through that, all those laws, we now kick into the most ritualistic possible laws. Again, it's another seeming non sequitur, and therefore the question is why does this parsha detailing the Mishkan and its construction immediately follow the parsha that discusses all of the civil and interpersonal laws? So perhaps we can suggest that the Torah is anticipating the opposite reaction as well. Right? It was last week we were concerned that people would think I should just serve God in a ritualistic way. God is in shul, he's in the Beis Medrash, but he's not necessarily in my home or at my place of business. Therefore, the Torah, anticipating that, wanted to connect the two. Here, the Torah may be going in the opposite direction as well, because after all, it's easy for us to get caught up in all those feel-good, moral, ethical, interpersonal laws that they end up threatening to swallow up, or at least push aside, the ritualistic laws between us and Hashem, which is a phenomenon we are experiencing these days. Not only with the Reform, conservative, and open or social orthodoxy movements, where halacha and ritual is discarded in favor of the more attractive, progressive, or liberal causes, but in the modern Orthodox and even plain or ultra-Orthodox worlds as well, where as long as we're singing songs and being respectful and doing often misguided chesed, then we don't have to adhere strictly to the strictures of the Torah. Where the feel-good, warm and fuzzy stuff trumps the boring, stern rituals, where tikkun olam, repairing the world, becomes more important than listening to Borei Olam, the creator of the world. It reminds me, I once heard a story about a reform group that was doing a Tikkun Olam trip to Israel. They had gotten a number of their congregants. They were going to go, I don't know, visit Arab villages or something and take care of the poor Palestinians. They were doing Tikkun Olam. And as they were on the bus, the leader of the reform group was trying to show off to the madrich, the guide that they had with them who was taking them around Israel, and he was telling him about all the things they had accomplished in the name of Tikkun Olam. And then he turns to the madrich and he says, let me ask you something. How do you say Tikkun Olam in Hebrew? And the point is that people have been convinced already that this is a cause in and of itself. They misunderstand the concept of Tikkun Olam. That is only in conjunction with and part of following the Torah and halacha to its strictest form. It is not in lieu of, it is in addition to. Perhaps the Torah anticipated this phenomenon, and that is why it juxtaposes this parsha with the interpersonal laws of Mishpatim to teach us not to forget about the importance of ritualistic details. We, of course, must adhere to all of the civil and interpersonal laws very strictly, since, as we said, they were equally given at Sinai. But don't let them overwhelm and become an excuse for not keeping the ritual ones. And we see that often with what I call the shalom bias excuse. We pretty much blame every failure to push ourselves higher spiritually on shalom bias. Why can't you come to Minyan in the morning? I need to help with my wife with the kids, shalom bias. Why didn't you come to the shir? Shalom bias. Why did you kill that man? Shalom bias. We start to use that as an excuse for everything. We like these nebulous, warm and fuzzy ideals to give us an excuse for why we are not striving in a much more impressive way. Again, that is not, because I know my wife's going to watch this video, that is not to suggest that we not work very hard on shalom bias. That is a fundamental precept in our lives. But let's not lean on it as an excuse to prevent ourselves from achieving more. And I kid with those examples, but we do get very carried away with that, which explains the Torah's concern with allowing those types of very important, and believe me, they are very important, interpersonal halachos to serve as excuses or rationalizations for why we are otherwise failing ritualistically. So we're going to bear that in mind. And now let's look at that famous second pasuk of the parsha that I referenced previously, and we are going to do a few different analyses of that pasuk. So the first pasuk, there's nothing to talk about. Like many parshios, it begins by Daber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Then the pasuk says, Daber al bnei Yisrael v'yikhu li truma meis kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhu es truma si. So Hashem said to Moshe, speak to the children of Israel and let them take for me. V'yikhu li truma. Let's start with take for me. We're going to try a few variations on that. So they're commanded to take a portion. So Rashi very famously on those words, v'yikhu li truma, the first Rashi in the pasuk, in the parsha, tells us li lishmi. What does it mean? Take for me truma. It means li lishmi. Me means for the sake of my name, says Hashem. For the sake of my name, take truma. So what is this telling us? So the Gemara in Brachos, we'll begin there with our analysis on Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, tells us the following idea. I'm just going to read it in English for brevity. Chizkiah, the son of Rav Parnach, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Why was the scriptural? We'll do a little Hebrew. Lama nismecha Parshas Sota le Parshas Trumos u'Maisros. Why is the parsha of Sota? Okay, now we'll have to fast forward with that. That's in Parshas Naso in Sefer Bamidbar. But why is that parsha of Sota juxtaposed to the parsha of Trumos and Maisros? This is the back end of another famous question which asks, why is the Parsha of Sota juxtaposed to the Parsha of Nazir? But it goes Nazir and then Sota, and then it talks about Trumos and Maasros. So the Gemara asks the second half, not why are Sota and Nazir connected, but why is Sota connected with the giving of Truma and Maaser? Says the Gemara, to tell you that whoever possesses Truma or Maaser and does not give it to a Kohen, in the end, he will be brought through his wife's hands to require the services of a Kohen. That's what the Gemara says. Meaning that she is going to become a Sota. And therefore, he will need the services of a Kohen. Shenemar, as it says, and then they quote a couple of psukim to prove this point. So therefore, the Gemara says the joining of these psukim teaches that one who withholds his trumos and maasros will in the end be faced with a wife who is a sota and will be compelled to bring her before the Kohen. So that is why those two parshios are juxtaposed. Now, based on that Gemara, the Chanukah Torah offers us a beautiful interpretation of this first Rashi. But first, to remind you of the Sota process. So what would happen, of course, very briefly, because I might need material for Parshas Naso, what would occur was a woman would tend to be, a married woman, would tend to be with another man who was not her husband, and her husband would give her a warning forbidding her from being alone with that man. Eidim, witnesses, then see the woman, the married woman, and this man that she was warned against being alone with, seclude themselves for a long enough period of time that they could have consummated their relationship. The witnesses don't see what actually occurred, but they see them go into a place alone, and it was for at least that long enough time, at which point then the husband brings his wife and goes through the sota process in order to determine whether in fact she had been unfaithful to him. Now understand, if she admits that she was unfaithful, then she does not go through this process at all. He just divorces her. Sota is only in a case where she denies having done anything wrong after having been warned by her husband not to seclude herself with that man, and then witnesses see them secluded. So what happens, he brings her up to the Beis HaMikdash, and then the Kohen would dissolve parchment with the Torah portion of Sota into the Sota water. What would happen is this portion is actually the part of what you're supposed to do. It's the part of the Torah that tells you what you're supposed to do with Sota, and that included Hashem's name on that parchment. So he would dissolve the parchment into the sota water, and then she would drink it, and either you would have sota pop after that, or if she was innocent, it would bring peace between her husband and herself, right? Because obviously there would be no way to bring true peace between them other than through a miracle, because having a court action would not necessarily assuage the husband's concerns that she had not been unfaithful, because obviously a jury or judges could be fooled. Therefore, what does Hashem do? Hashem allows this process to go forward, which causes his name to be erased in the water, and this is the only instance in the Torah that we are ever allowed to erase Hashem's name. And he does it, Hashem allows that only so that there could be true peace between husband and wife. Shalom bayis. So we see Hashem is willing to allow his name to be erased if it will bring shalom between husband and wife. And therefore, says the Chanukah Torah, that is why the pasuk says that one should bring the truma, the contribution, li lishmi, for the sake of my name, says Hashem. Because if you do not bring it, right, as the Gemara told us, if you do not bring truma to the Kohen, then as we learned, ultimately you'll have to come to the Kohen because your wife is a sota, which in turn will cause Hashem's name to be erased. Therefore, says Hashem, do it for the sake of my name. Bring that truma so my name need not be erased. And I want to add to that beautiful thought the following idea that Rashi says, do it li lishmi, for the sake of Shmi, God's name. The gematria of Shmi, Shin, Mem, Yud, is 350. Shin is 300, Mem is 40, and Yud is 10. Hashem's name that it's speaking of is God's ineffable name, Yud Ke Vav Ke, which is a very famous gematria of 26. 350 and 26 is 376. Shmi Yud Ke Vav Ke equals 376, which is the same gematria as Shalom, as peace. Shin Lamed Vav Mem equals 376. Therefore, we see the name of Hashem is 376, which is why he's willing to erase it if it will bring its equal, which is Shalom. Of course, we also learn from this pasuk of giving truma that this was the first ever fundraising appeal in Jewish history, but certainly not the last. And from here we learn about the importance of giving a portion of our assets, right? Truma equals portion for tzedakah. We're going to come back to that topic shortly. Another beautiful understanding of this terminology, the yichuli truma, take for me a portion, take for me truma, is provided by the Medrash. It tells us that the term yikach, vayichu, it's the same root word as kach, or yikach, to take, is an allusion to the Torah. Because of course, as we know very famously, certain psukim, I'm convinced you just need mazel when you're a pasuk. Some of them are just better known than others because they had mazel of having a song attached to them, and therefore if we sing that pasuk, we tend to know better than others. Such is the case over here, of course, because when we put back the Torah, Mondays and Thursdays as well, but certainly on Shabbos, often we sing this pasuk, Ki lekach tov nasati lachem. It starts, Eitz chayim hi l'machazikim ba, v'samchem me'ashar darcher derchenuam, Ki lekach tov nasati lachem. Now, Ki lekach tov nasati lachem means I have given you a good portion. Lekach is a portion, a good portion. And that's a reference to the Torah. But the Medrash tells us that not only do we acquire the Torah from Hashem, but Hashem, so to speak, comes along with it in the deal. So says the Medrash, in speaking of why it's called a lekach tov. Why is Torah called a good acquisition? Right? Ki lekach tov nasati lachem. I have given you this good acquisition. Why is it a good acquisition? Says the Medrash. Again, I'll read it in English for brevity. Now, is there any acquisition in which the seller himself is sold along with the acquired item? Yet in this case, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Bnei Yisrael, in effect, I sold you my Torah, and as it were, I myself was sold along with it. Shenemar v'yichu li truma, as it is stated, and let them take for me a portion. V'yichu li truma also means v'yichu li, take me as a portion. What Hashem is saying is that when you took the Torah, you took me. V'yichu li truma means you took me as a portion as well. Hashem came along in the deal, so to speak. Says the Medrash. This can be illustrated by a mashal. Of course, they have to. And of course, like all good mashals, this involves a king. The mashal tells us, compares it to a king who had an only daughter. One of the other kings came and took her as a wife. Subsequently, he sought to return her to his land and to return to his land and to take his wife with him. The father-in-law king said to him, my daughter whom I have given you is an only daughter. Thus I am unable to part from her. But I am equally unable to tell you, do not take her to your land, for she is your wife. Rather, do this favor for me. Any place that you go, prepare a room for me so that I may dwell near you, for I am unable to leave my daughter. So too did the Holy One, blessed is He, say to Israel, I have given you the Torah. I am unable to part from it, but I am also unable to tell you, do not take it. Rather, do this favor for me. Any place that you go, prepare a house for me, that I may dwell therein. Shenemar, as it says, and it's from this week's Parsha as well, Vasu li mikdash. They shall make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'socham, so that I may dwell with them. So we see from there that Hashem came along with the Torah and resided in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, and when that was destroyed, he came to reside right here. I'm in a shul now, that's why I say that. Yes, we are in a Mikdash Ma'at whenever we are in a shul. It is a tiny piece of the Mikdash, and we must treat it as such and behave in it as such. Now we'll just briefly focus on a couple of aspects of the Mishkan, and then we will return to this pasuk. The pasuk tells us that the poles, the badim, when they were attached to the aron, once they were attached, they were forbidden to ever become separated from the aron thereafter. It's actually a law in the Torah. Even the Rambam lists it as one of the negative commands, that you may not remove the poles from the aron. The Tiferes Yisrael says something fantastic. He tells us that the reason why the supports cannot become detached is because the supports represent the supporters of the Torah, those that carry the Torah, those that support the Torah. And they can never be separated from it. It's always there as a protection for them. When you support the Torah, of course, the Torah protects you thereafter. And therefore, supporters of the Torah may never become detached from the Torah itself. It always protects them. I tell this to you because it reminds me of my very first meeting that I had with Rabbi Yitzchak Asuli, a very dear friend of mine, who's the Rosh Kollel of the Kollel in Eretz Yisrael. And the very first time he came to see me in my office, this is over 20 years ago, he came to me and he talked to me about this very pasuk. Ki lekach tov nosati lechem torasi al tazovu, as we referenced, and then of course it says, even perhaps more famously, Eitz chayim hi l'machazikim ba. It is a tree of life to those that grasp it or support it. See, machzik, if you're machzik something, so it can be interpreted as you are grasping it, but also it could mean supporting it, right? If you're machzik somebody, if you give them chizuk, you're supporting them. So he said, why does it use that language with a word that can be understood? Are you supporting it or are you grabbing onto it? So he told me the following idea. Imagine if somebody is on a ship and there's a shipwreck, lo aleinu. And of course, the boat shatters apart and there are pieces of wood floating in the water. So if somebody is in the water, drowning or needing some support, they swim over to a piece of wood and they grab onto that wood and they hold it because of course wood floats and that will help them stay alive. Now if you did not know anything about the properties of a person and the properties of wood and you just looked at it from above, from a drone, let's say, although I must tell you, I saw a very cool thing. Now they use drones, they see people in the water, and they attach like these inflatable dinghies to them. I saw this recently, amazing, and they sent the drone over these two boys that were in the middle of the water somewhere, dropped the dinghy, boom, they were able to be saved. Really, that is the best possible use of technology when we use it for things of that nature. Anyway, if you did not know the features, the properties of wood and man, and you looked from above, it would look like the man is supporting the wood. It would look, when he's holding on to it, that he's keeping the wood afloat. But of course we all know when the truth is revealed, it is the wood that is supporting the man, not vice versa. So too he said with the Torah. It is a tree of life to those that grasp it or support it, meaning people who support the Torah sometimes, and that is the right thing to do, but sometimes they think they're holding the Torah up. In effect, that is telling us just the opposite. It is the Torah that is holding them up. And therefore, that is the power of the idea in that pasuk. So of course, after he told me that story, I said to him, how much will this piece of wood cost me? I've been the president of his kollel for over 20 years now, and he still hasn't given me a price for that. But I can tell you the reason why, of course, is because it's priceless. Support of Torah is like nothing else that you can do. When you're machzik the Torah, when you support the Torah, when you encourage people with Torah, there is no greater thing than you can do. And you may think that you're supporting it, but I promise you, it is supporting you. And we must remember that. We must remember to give until it hurts. Which brings us to our final thoughts on this pasuk, V'yichu li Terumah. So the pasuk said, Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yichu li Terumah. Speak to b'nei Yisrael and tell them v'yichu li Terumah, which we have either so far translated as take for me or take me Terumah. Both the Yalkut Shimoni and the Or HaChaim ask the following obvious question, as do other commentators. Hashem owns the world. Does he need our gifts? Does he need us to give the tzedakah? He's imploring us, please, Daber b'nei Yisrael, v'amarti lahem, v'yichu li Terumah. Please go to them and tell them, take some Terumah for me. Let's use the Pashup Pshat understanding, which we would mean, go take some money and give it to the proper things. Do it for my sake. And the Yalkut tells us that the word here, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, is a Lashon Piyus, which means it's an appeasing language. Hashem said to Moshe, appease them, cajole them into giving money for the Mishkan. Why would he need to appease them or cajole them? So the Tana Devei Eliyahu tells us the following idea. In last week's Parsha, which could explain another juxtaposition between these two parshios. At the end of last week's parsha, of course, very famously, even though we didn't speak about it, nonetheless, it's still famous. It says, Kol asher diber Hashem, naseh v'nishma. All that Hashem tells us, we will do and we will obey. And here, it says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael. Again, using that Daber word. He said those two dabers are used to connect the two ideas. Hashem said, right after Kol asher diber Hashem naseh v'nishma, Hashem says, Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yichu li Terumah. So he connects the word daber and tells us that Hashem was saying to Moshe, strike while the iron's hot. Right now, when they are so inspired, right? They just said naseh v'nishma, daber them v'yichu li Terumah. They're feeling a moment right now. This is the time. Go to them and say, give some money for the purpose of the Mishkan. Make sure to contribute money for the Torah. Right now, when they're so inspired. And as I heard from Rabbi Frand, what's the lesson in that? It's that it's very hard to get people to part with their money. That is just a simple fact, full stop. Therefore, before the mood dissipates, while they're still inspired, grab them. I remember, this is also over 20 years ago, I think. It pains me that I can tell you so many good stories from over 20 years ago. It means I'm not 20 anymore. When I lived in Englewood, New Jersey, Englewood is a gorgeous community, very large, bustling, and it is a very generous community, very generous. I firmly believe that we must reflect upon all the places that we live in our life, because each stop has a very important thing for us to learn from it. Everywhere we've been in our lives, it's not accidental. Hashem needs us to extract certain lessons from those places before we reach wherever our final destination is. I firmly believe, I thought I was a generous person before I moved to Englewood, but it was there I understood what generosity really is. Whatever other challenges they may have in that community, they are astoundingly generous and really opened my eyes to understand what generosity really is. Nonetheless, even though it is very affluent and has many beautiful structures in it, this is in the mid to late 90s, their mikvah was woefully inadequate. I mean woefully inadequate. It was a rundown, broken down, little hole in the wall. And to me, that was a grave embarrassment. My wife, as many others in the community, would drive to Teaneck in order to go to the mikveh there because it was just not a proper, I'm not saying it wasn't kosher, but it was not a proper mikveh, and certainly not for a community like that had beautiful shuls, even more gorgeous houses. To have a mikveh like that was simply a bizayon. It was disgraceful. So I took it upon myself with my friend Jason Tiegman to start a fundraising drive in order to redo the mikvah, to make it a bekavadik place, a proper place that the women would be able to use. And I was a young man in those days. I really had passion. If you think I'm energetic now, you should have seen me back then. And sure enough, after a multi-month, it must have been a 6-month campaign, sending out mailings, getting everybody hyped up, we were starting to get in some good money, but then it was decided by the Rabbi Golden that I should go around to all the minyanim in the morning on a Shabbos and address them and try to inspire them to contribute mightily to the cause. And Baruch Hashem, it was an exceedingly successful campaign, exceedingly successful. And we had even made up those little foldy cards, it has your name, and then you fold over the tab for how much you want to give. And sure enough, we collected all of those. Whoever sent in their money, then we waited a few weeks, and we started sending out invoices. And there was one person, a wealthy man, I'm sure a generous man, not somebody I imagined would be that interested in this project. And I looked at his card, and he folded it over for $5,000. And this is over 20 years ago, so that's really a lot of money. And I was taken aback, but I said, cool. So we sent him out an invoice for $5,000. He sends me back a check for $360. And I want to say a note that was right below nasty. And it said something to the effect of, I don't appreciate trying to get more money out of me than I otherwise would pledge for something like this. I cannot imagine I pledged more than $360, and therefore that is what I am enclosing. Now, I was very taken back. I was certainly upset about this. I considered it for a while, and I did the following. I asked the shul to give me his tax receipt for that, and I wanted to add in a note myself, and I sent it back to him together with his pledge card. And there were no other foldovers in any of those other. It's not like there was any manipulation. That was the only one folded over with his pledge card, and just wrote a note saying, I apologize so much if you were offended in any way. We did not try to get any more money out of you than we thought you had pledged. I'm enclosing your pledge card so at least you could understand where we were coming from. Thank you so much for your generous donation. And that was it. And I received from him a few days later a letter back with a check for $5,000. And he said, I apologize to you. I see indeed I did pledge. I was surprised because that's not something I would normally do. He said, but then I remembered I was so inspired at that moment, and that's why I folded it down. So whatever yashkach to you, and he sent in the money. And I learned a very powerful lesson from that. It is true, this lesson is so powerful. You must strike when the iron is hot, when people are inspired. And it doesn't have to be for money. It could be for commitment to go to a shir. It could be to go to minyan. It could be to do anything. Whatever they're taking upon themselves, strike when it's hot. That's what you need to do when the person's inspired, because then you concretize the gains that they have made from that inspiration. If you wait too long, it dissipates and it's gone forever. Which brings me to a pasuk from Mishlei. The pasuk in Mishlei says, Tavas Adam Chasto, Yutav Rosh, Tavas Adam Chasto, V'tov Rosh Be'ish Kazav, which translates, longing for a person is his kindness, or really a man desires to do good, but a pauper is better than a rich man who deceives. That is the pasuk in Mishlei. So what does that mean? On the pasuk pshat, says Art Scroll on that, people seek the friendship of someone who promises generosity, but it is better to be poor and promise nothing than to be rich and promise falsely. So what is that talking about? The idea is that very often a person talks big, but when it comes time to write the check, as we just discussed, then often they can't quite remember the pledge unless you have one of those fold-over pledge cards. What that pasuk is telling us is that when we don't have money, then we are like, okay, Hashem, Powerball's 270 million this week. Let me tell you, God, what I'm willing to do for you if you see fit to bless me with that largesse. I am going to end world hunger. I am going to start 27 yeshivas. I am going to do X, Y, big promises. And then what happens? The guy wins Powerball. Then it becomes a little bit of a different story. When we don't have it, that's what that pasuk is talking about. A man desires to do good, but a pauper is better than a rich man who deceives. A guy who has nothing, so he's not saying anything. But if he thinks he's going to get money, he's like, oh man, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And then when we get it, it's not always easy to part with it. And I mentioned that because Bnei Yisrael did not earn or work for their money in the desert. Maybe it was a payment for the slavery, but they had crazy wealth. Everyone was so fabulously wealthy that the Gemara tells us that each person left Egypt with 90 donkeys each laden with gold, silver, jewels, etc. So I ask you, why did they need to be appeased or cajoled to give this money? A, they didn't earn it, and B, they had more than they could possibly ever know what to do with. And remember, they also had no expenses in the desert. You didn't need new clothing, no orthodontist bills, no food, rent, nothing. But it was their money now. Once it was their money, it becomes hard to get them to part with it. You know, there's an old story about Stalin Yamach Shmo in his earlier days. I'm assuming it's an apocryphal story, but who cares? When he was trying to inculcate people with communism, teaching them how everybody has to share his wealth, etc. So there's a story told that a man was brought in to see Comrade Stalin. And Stalin says to him, if you had 2 cows, what would you do with it? He said, well, one for me and one for Comrade Stalin. Okay. And 2 mansions? One for me and one for Comrade Stalin. 2 cars? One for me and one for Comrade Stalin. 2 boats? One for me, one for Comrade Stalin. 2 planes? One for me, one for Comrade Stalin. 2 chickens? 2 chickens? I would keep them both for myself. Stalin says, what? What are you saying? I don't understand. The cows, mansions, cars, boats, you said one for me, one for you. But chickens, you won't share with me? Why not? The man said, because I don't own any cows or cars or mansions and planes. But 2 chickens, I have. And that's a very important lesson. If you have 2 chickens, you don't want to part with the 2 chickens because you have it. And once you have it, you don't want to part with it. We are brilliant at rationalizing reasons to not give. And by the way, I'm not talking a few bucks. I'm talking 10% minimum, but 20% is the goal. And the question is, do we have the faith to do that? So we need to be in the right mind frame. We say, if only I had X, and then when we get it, we say, I don't know. We say whatever we need to say in order to avoid giving too much money. But we need to be aware and avoid being that rich man who deceives that Shlomo HaMelech told us about in Mishlei. Which brings us to our final thoughts. In line with what we just said, the Medrash tells us that we should give. You know why? Because it's all Hashem's anyway. What do you think you're giving? You're giving that which is God's. Okay. He let you hang on to it for a while. But don't think it's anything other than God's. The Medrash tells us the following idea. It asks, why would Hashem, it asks a very innocent question. It says, why would Hashem even ask us, take Terumah? After all, the pasuk says, "Li hakesef v'li hazav num Hashem tzvakos." Mine is the silver and mine is the gold. The word of Hashem, master of legions. In other words, it's all God's. So what are we even talking about here? But as we said, of course, it's all God's. But when you've given it to me to hang on to, it's not so easy for me to part with it. So we have seen V'yichuli Terumah. We've seen it translated as "take for me." We've seen it translated as "take me." And now, based on this medrash, we can suggest a third idea. Hashem said, take for me, or really, take from me. Take for me because it was mine before you got the money, and it's still mine now. Perhaps we can suggest Hashem is saying, V'yichuli Terumah, take from me Terumah. It was God's. Take some of that from me, from that which I gave you, and give it to Terumah. It's all mine, so take some from what I gave you. It's a lesson we must always bear in mind and never forget. It is all Hashem's. I know somebody who their parents were supporting them, will say, way beyond the acceptable age. And they were already married with a number of children, and they were still fully on the payroll. So one time they were remarking to me that their parents were having, I don't know, some special anniversary or a special birthday. I don't remember what it was. And I said, oh, that's so nice. What gifts are you getting for your parents? I mean, it's so amazing, for you that they're able to take care of you and your family. What are you going to get for them? And the guy said the following to me. He said, it's not right. It's not nice for me to give them a present. I mean, they gave me this money. Isn't it weird to take some of the money that they gave me and then buy them a present with it? In a very rare moment, I was speechless. I did not know what to say to that person. That is as skewed of a reasoning as you could possibly have. In fact, the other way is the obvious one. It's a kal v'chomer. If you earn the money on your own, and that could be possible when it comes to you and your parents, of course, then you should still do it. But at least we could say, okay, maybe not. You earned it your own. Maybe you didn't want to spend your money. But if your parents gave you the money, then how much more so should you use that money to thank them, to give them a gift? And that's precisely what Hashem is telling us here. Because with Him, it's always from Hashem. There's no independence from that. So it's just the proper thing to do. Forget about anything else. Hashem gave you everything. Period. Full stop. So at least don't be like that guy. Don't say to yourself, what does he need from me? Yeah, you know what he needs? He needs for you to take a little bit of that, take it from him, and give it to somebody else. That's what Hashem needs you to do. It's all Hashem's, but don't fool yourself. When we don't have it, we say we'll give it. And when we have it, well, that is why Hashem says, not only take it for me, but take it from me. That is the attitude we must have. And you can trust me when I tell you this. In other words, take it from me. Have a good Shabbos.